Precambrian era, 4.5 billion to 541 million years ago. Between 4 billion and 2.5 billion years ago, the continental shield rock began to form. Approximately 70% of continental landmass was formed during this time. Small island landmasses floated in the molten seas. About 2.5 billion years ago, enough shield rock had formed to start recognizable geological processes such as plate tectonics. This shifted Earth's progress from a molten hell to a living planet. About 1.2 billion years ago, plate tectonics forced the available shield rock to collide, forming Rodinia, Earth's first supercontinent. During the long course of Precambrian era, the climatic conditions of Earth changed considerably. Earth had acquired enough mass to hold a thin atmosphere composed of methane, ammonia, and other gases. Water from comets and hydrated rock condensed in the atmosphere and fell as heavy rain, cooling the planet and filling the first oceans with liquid water. At about 2.4 billion years ago, oxygen was released from the seas as a byproduct of photosynthesis from cyanobacteria. The Precambrian era represents more than 80% of the total geologic record. The beginning of the Precambrian era starts at the stage of our early planet, forming roughly 4.5 billion years ago, and ends at about 541 million years ago, once more complex forms of life emerge. At the end of this era, simple single-celled organisms had already arrived on the planet, providing oxygen in our oceans and atmosphere. Represented on a 12-hour clock, the Precambrian era lasts 10.5 hours, starting from 12 o'clock p.m. and ending at 10:30 p.m. It is now known that Precambrian rocks contain evidence of the very beginnings of life on Earth, which, based on the age of the rocks that contain the oldest clues of life, took place nearly 3.5 billion years ago. The explosion of life forms without skeletons before the Cambrian, and even before the development of sexual reproduction. By the end of the Precambrian, the ocean floor was covered in a living mat of bacterial life. Exactly when or how it happened is unknown, but microfossils of this time indicate that life began in the oceans about 3.5 to 2.8 billion years ago. It is probable that these microscopic prokaryotes began as chemoautotrophs, anaerobic bacteria able to obtain carbon from carbon dioxide.
Hello, today we will show you around the Cambrian period, where we first begin to see complex multicellular life.
The Cambrian period began 541 million years ago and ended 485 million years ago, taking up 8 minutes on the geological time clock, starting at 1040. The landmass in the Cambrian was concentrated in the southern hemisphere. Here, supercontinent Rodinia began to split into smaller continents of Gondwana, Laurentia, Siberia, and Baltica.
Though these landmasses were just barren rocks, as no life at this point had moved above water. Therefore, the Cambrian period is about life below sea level.
The Cambrian world took place between two ice ages, the late Proterozoic and the Ordovician. During these ice ages, global temperatures led to widespread extinctions. Though during the Cambrian period, there was no significant ice formation. Temperatures during this period were warmer and more consistent or widespread than today. With the melting of the Proterozoic ice age at the beginning of the Cambrian period, sea levels rose significantly and created epeiric seas. Epeiric seas allowed marine invertebrates to flourish, leading to the first hard-shelled animals. This is the first time we are seeing complex life rather than just single-cell organisms in the Precambrian era.
These epeiric seas also allow life reliant on photosynthesis to populate the ocean, giving rise to algae and plant life.
Also during the Cambrian period, significant quantities of oxygen mixed with the oceans for the first time, helping many life forms thrive. These events led to the explosion of life during the Cambrian period and is the first time we see complex life. Some of these animals in this period include the Laginia, which used its appendages to filter water from sediment on the seafloor to find food, then using its mouth appendages to feed. Another creature from this time is the Opabenia, which is a carnivore that lived on the seafloor. Also on the seafloor you can find Voxia, which is similar to modern-day sponges and fed on nutrients in the water.
The explosion in complex life makes the Cambrian period known as one of the most influential times for life on Earth, as it is the first time we see many major groups of animals in fossil records. Though all good things come to an end, the Cambrian period ended with the start of
the Ordovician Ice Age.
Welcome to the Ordovician period.
Today we're going to be talking about the Ordovician period.
Let's start with the climate and geography.
Most of the period was warm and mild, but it had a very heavy humidity.
However, towards the end, once Gondwana settled on the North Pole, it caused a massive ice age.
That's right. In fact, 60% of all invertebrates went extinct, and 25% of all families.
Here's a map of Gondwana during the Ordovician period.
It looks so different from our map today.
Let's talk about the plants and animals next.
A lot of plants and animals in this period were water-based,
such as the jawless fish, otherwise known as Arandaspis and Astrospis.
Here's a picture of what they look like. Pretty crazy, right?
Nautiloids are one of the largest predators in the sea, and their descendants are still around today.
They look like large snails, don't they?
Speaking of snails, mollusks are one of the most predominant sea snails in this period.
Here's a picture of some mollusks.
Let's talk about some plants during the Ordovician period.
All of the plants didn't have veins, so they needed to be in the water in order to sustain enough life.
That's right. A lot of them were algae and moss, such as this plant.
There was also a lot of fungi as well, and combined with algae, they made lichen, which also lived in the water.
These plants all had chlorophyll and made their own food.
So they were really true plants, even though they did live only in the water.
Now let's talk about the Ordovician period and the scale of time.
So imagine all of the time in the world was fit into 12 hours. That's 4.6 billion years.
The current time period would be 11:58 p.m.
The Ordovician period, however, started at 10:41 p.m. and ended at 10:47 p.m.
This made it only 6 minutes long, or 41.2 million years long.
Imagine every hour was 375 million years. This makes the Ordovician period very short in the period of time.
This will be all for the Ordovician period. We hope you learned something interesting.
Thank you for listening.
The Silurian period is one of many other periods I'm sure you haven't heard of, but today we are going to look into this period. The geological era was located at 1030, which means that the Silurian period lasted about 4 minutes long. From 1047 to 1051, it might seem like it wasn't much, but this 4 minutes led to 24.6 million years long.
The Silurian period was mostly involved with water, with it being a shallow ocean in some part of the world, which would later be known as North America. At the time the landmass was low, that North America was actually underwater. Due to glaciers melting, it led to an increase in water, which led to arthropods being one of the first type of animals to touch the land. The weather was warm and stable throughout this time, and because of this was able to develop the arrival of the first plants to colonize the land.
And now with this great knowledge you have about the one and only Silurian period, you can pass it on to people, understand the history of Earth that we live in.
Yeah, 20 steps.
We are doing our project on the Devonian period.
The surface of the Earth during the Devonian period looked like mostly desert and forest with lots of plants.
The climate was very warm and dry. Sea levels were high with much of western North America underwater. There was no ice age.
This is what the Earth looked like during this period. As you can see, it looks very warm and humid.
Many plants grew during this period. They created more oxygen and there was less CO2 in the air.
Our geological period is located at 11 o'clock. The Devonian period is 60 million years long, which shows up as 10 minutes on the clock. This is what the surface of the Earth looked like during the Devonian period.
The Devonian period is known as the Age of Fish. It is famous for the thousands of species of fish that were developed in the Devonian seas.
When the first fish started to develop during the Devonian period, they had no jaws, and their support structure was made out of cartilage. Since this material does not fossilize well, the earliest fossils were of fish whose outside skin was protected by scales and plates made of bony tissue. These fish were called ostracoderms. Their name means shell skins. Dude.
This is one of the fossils during this time period that had no jaw.
Here are some fossils from the Devonian period.
The Carboniferous period, though not one of the most well-known periods, is extremely interesting and very closely related to our present-day life on Earth. During this period, more land masses emerged from the water and coal deposits in Pennsylvania and Mississippi were created. If you look at the age of the Earth as a 12-hour clock, the Carboniferous period resides from 57 minutes and 24 seconds ago until 47 minutes and 48 seconds ago. In total, it lasts 9 minutes and 36 seconds. The Carboniferous period is divided into two major subdivisions, the Mississippian and Pennsylvanian periods. The land was emerging from water, and the land masses were made up of tons of basement rock that made up what is now South America, Africa, Antarctica, North America, Western Europe, and India. Present-day Siberia and China were the only land masses disconnected from everything else. Due to the rich coal deposits of this time, the period has been called the Coal Age. The name Carboniferous refers to the coal-bearing strata because the coal had a lot of carbon in it. Most of the land masses were covered in swampy forests and coal swamps. Since the land masses recently came out of the water, the land was very wet and swampy.
Let's talk about the climate. Since the land was so low, it tended to flood a lot. The air also had tons of oxygen from all the plants and were able to remove much of the carbon dioxide in the air and convert it to oxygen. Then, the air was approximately 35% oxygen. However, today, it's only 21%. There were also a lot of short droughts in this time caused by glaciers. Because of the lack of CO2, the temperature was much cooler. This started forming glaciers at the poles and more humid climates near the equator, similar to what we have today. Because of the massive amounts of oxygen in the air, the plants and animals were able to grow bigger than they are today. From that, it has animals such as the Meganeura and Arthropleura. The Meganeura is a huge dragonfly with wingspans of 60 to 70 centimeters, which is about 2 feet. The Arthropleura was a giant millipede that could grow to up to 1.5 meters long. This, combined with the fact that sea animals were starting to go on land, made for a lot of interesting-looking creatures. There is also the Sigliera tree, which just goes to show how plants were able to develop really cool and interesting characteristics in this climate. All of this just goes to show that the Carboniferous period was really interesting and informative. Just Google some of the animals in that time and be ready for some really cool and weird-looking creatures.
Welcome to the Permian period with Bailey and A-Rob. We'll be discussing about the different animals and planets as well as climate and landmass.
At this time, there were no mammals. Insects, reptiles, and amphibians ruled the earth, such as the gorgonops and aerops. There was also a lot of plant life, like the Sigillaria and ginkgo tree.
The earth was very different at this time. In the south, there was an ice cap that covered much of the region. The south was cold and arid, where animals that were cold-blooded had to find ways to get used to the high temperatures and super low temperatures at night. Then, during the day, it would pass 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
The northern area had it a bit worse, where they suffered increasingly from intense heat and seasonal fluctuations between both wet and dry conditions. Even the continents were one giant piece called Pangaea that got created by Gondwana in Euramerica. During this time of the Permian period, the Earth had presented severe extreme climate and environments.
Overall, the Permian period lasted only 47 million years, yet the entire lifespan of the Earth was only a 12-hour clock. Our period was only about 8 minutes long.
The Permian period ended in the largest extinction event in Earth's history. 70% of all species became extinct, alongside with 97% of marine species, 50% of all biological families, and 83% of all genera also became extinct, carving the way for the next era.
The Triassic period is the first and shortest period in the Mesozoic era, starting 251 million years ago and spanning 55 million years.
The Triassic period started at around 11:18 p.m. and ended at 11:27. In total, it lasted only 9 minutes on the geological clock.
Almost all of Earth's landmass at this time was compressed into the supercontinent Pangaea. In the mid-Triassic period, 175 million years ago, the sea split Pangaea along the equator.
The climate in the supercontinent of Pangaea was generally very dry, with very hot summers and very cold winters. In the continental interior, the coastal region experienced seasonal monsoons. At the end of the Triassic period, Earth actually contained the same gases it does today. However, the concentration was different. It contained nitrogen, oxygen, methane, water vapor, argon, and carbon dioxide. At this point in time, Earth contained the lowest oxygen levels in more than 500 years. This made it difficult for animals to grow and reproduce.
In the early Triassic period, the most common land vertebrate was Lystrosaurus. It was an herbivore that had only 2 tusk-like teeth. Survived the Permian-Triassic extinction, which kicked off the early Triassic period. Another life form in the early Triassic period was Proterosuchus. It looked similar to modern-day crocodiles, but with unique features such as its hook-shaped mouth and long cone-shaped teeth.
Fun facts! Proterosuchus often preyed on Lystrosaurus.
There are 2 important organisms in the mid-Triassic period. The first is Cynognathus. This early mammal had many modern mammal features such as differentiated teeth, proving effective processing of food, a secondary palate in the mouth, which indicates being able to breathe while swallowing, and more. Another important organism is Tanystropheus. Tanystropheus is believed to be semi-aquatic because its fossils have been found mostly in semi-aquatic sites. It can grow to be 20 feet long. 9.8 of those feet are in the neck alone. From its bone structure, we can assume that it is rear-weighted and there isn't much lateral movement in the neck. Plateosaurus, meaning broad lizard, is from the late Triassic period. Over 100 skeletons have been found, and some are almost complete. Plateosaurus is a bipedal herbivore. Coelophysis is a slender, ground-dwelling carnivore. It is one of the earliest known dinosaur genera. Coelophysis is one of the most specimen-rich dinosaur genera.
We are going to be explaining the Jurassic era, talking about the climate and the land mass and what caused the era to end. The climate of the Jurassic period was warmer than many modern-day climates. Modern temperate biomes experienced a tropical climate, and polar regions had a temperate climate. Epicontinental seas, also known as inland seas, started to form due to these rising sea levels. These rising sea levels caused an increase in the humidity level, which marks a big difference between the Triassic and the Jurassic. While the Triassic climate was dry, the Jurassic climate was wetter and more humid, and almost resembled a rainforest in the tropical areas. These rainforest-like conditions paved the way for lush vegetation to grow, slightly increasing the carbon dioxide levels, therefore creating a greenhouse climate and warming throughout the world. Pangaea was the name of a landmass that began to break up and the sea levels rose. In the early Jurassic period, the continents were still clustered around the equator, roughly in the shape of a C that bordered the Tethys Sea. A split formed during the Jurassic period that divided Pangaea into two large landmasses. Accepted theory for the breakup of the supercontinent Pangaea is the action of plate tectonics, causing a spreading rift split the sea shape of Pangaea into two large, separate landmasses. Carnivores such as Allosaurus, small, fast coelurosaurs, and ceratosaurs such as Dilophosaurus. The Jurassic also saw the origination of the first birds, including the well-known Archaeopteryx, probably from Coelurosaurian ancestors. The Jurassic coast is one of the most important sources of reptile fossils in the world. Here are some fossils that were around in the time era along with their scientific names. The sea urchin name, Tylosidaris clavigera, created 90 million years ago. The dragon, insects, created 140 million years ago. Dinosaur, scientific name Megalosaurus bucklandii ratati, 170 million years ago. Woolly rhinoceros, scientific name Coelodontus cf. Antiquitatus, created a million years ago.
Let's go back in time.
Today, Elvie and I will be talking about the Cretaceous period. As you can see in this picture, the climate was much warmer during the Cretaceous period. There was no ice and the sea level was 330 feet higher with the average surface air temperature of 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Since the climate was much warmer than other time periods, all animals lived anywhere.
The Cretaceous period lasted 79 million years, and this here is a clock in 24 hours, which will demonstrate how it would look like in 24 hours. Which started at 11:14 p.m. and ended at 11:39 p.m.
The Cretaceous period was a time of great change in plant life, animal life, and even of the face of the earth. These fast-growing adaptable plants also gave rise to a huge bloom in the dinosaur world. Most of the dinosaurs that have been found date from the late Cretaceous period, where flowering plants were supplying plant-eating dinosaurs with plentiful and nutritious food.
This here is a Tarbosaurus. It was alive 100 million years ago. It had a length of 39 feet. It's a cousin of the T-Rex and it lived in China. This here is a T-Rex. 68 million years ago was when it was roaming the earth. It lived in the mid-states of the United States. It's 49 feet long and it's a carnivore. And this here is the Pteranodon. It's 73 million years old. It lived in North America and it had a 23-foot wingspan, and it was also a carnivore. This here is a reenacted footage of what the asteroid that killed all the dinosaurs would have looked like. It is estimated to have hit around the area of Yucatan, Mexico. And these pictures right here is what the scenario could have or would have looked like.
One famous fossil from the Cretaceous period is the fossil of a T-Rex. The museum that they keep this fossil, they named the dinosaur Jane. Jane's legs are proportionally larger than an adult. Jane was about 7.5 feet high at the hip as opposed to 12 feet for an adult. At 21 feet in length, she was only half the average adult length of 40 feet. Her estimate weight was only 1,500 pounds as opposed to 11,000 pounds for a full-grown adult. This fossil was found by 14 member staff and volunteering group from the museum.
Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Paleogene period. The Paleogene period began 65 million years ago and lasted 43 million years. Represented on a geological clock, it would last 11 minutes and start at 11:48 p.m. and end at 11:59 p.m. Now we're going to talk about landmass. In the beginning of the Paleogene period, Europe and North America were joined together, and Australia is joined with Antarctica. India is not yet connected with Asia, and the Atlantic Ocean is small. South America and Africa have just separated. Halfway through the Paleogene period is when North America and Europe separated. After that, Australia separated from Antarctica, causing Antarctica to be covered by glaciers. India crashes into Asia, creating the Himalayan mountains, and sea levels are low.
The climate during the Paleogene period began with the tropical days hot and humid. In the atmosphere, there are high percentages of greenhouse gases such as water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, ozone, etc. Towards the end, it was becoming cooler and drier. These temperatures signaled that change is coming to Earth, which helped the plants and animals adapt or die to the new climate change. During the Paleogene time, many new species evolved, time of large birds, huge predators, and dominant animals. Most flightless birds are large 10-feet predators that roam the forest, belonging to the family called Phyllosacid. Insect population increased. The plants were similar to the ones today. Mammals became dominant animals, fish species branched out, and sharks' population increased in amount. Huge lakes formed in the western United States during the Eocene. The Green River Formation is a famous fossil area created by these lakes and many kinds of fish fossils. A fossil found in the Green River came from mid-Eocene named Nadia fossil about 500 million years ago. The second fossil found lived 47 million years ago during the Middle Eocene, called Darwinus. The third fossil found in the Green River Formation formed from mountains lakes during the Eocene about 48 million years ago, named Leaf Fossil Eocene A. Lastly, in the late Eocene is Paleornis antarcticus, also referred to as the narrow-flippered penguin, standing between 43 and 55 inches. In the Basilosaurus, or king lizard, approximately 41.3 to 33.9 million years ago, having a length of about 65 feet long.
The Neogene period lasted from 23 million years ago to around 3 million years ago. It was the period before the one we're currently in right now.
The Earth looked really similar 20 million years ago as it does now. Some of the differences were that Italy had just attached to Europe, forming the Alps, and Spain was also in the process of attaching to Europe, which was forming the Pyrenees.
The Neogene era was the beginning of an ice age. The climate became much drier and cooler, and sea levels lowered. Due to the sea levels dropping, a lot of land bridges between continents appeared.
This enabled different species who were stuck on one continent to be able to migrate to other continents. Another thing that changed the climate was that new mountain ranges like the Alps and Pyrenees rose up, which trapped water high up away from oceans.
Because during this period the planet was entering an ice age, the amount of carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas, in the atmosphere decreased, which helped decrease the temperature a lot.
The Neogene period lasted from about 23 million years ago to 3 million years ago. If this was a time on a 12-hour clock, it would be about 2.5 minutes of Earth's history.
A lot of the animals that were around during the Neogene period were the ancestors for a lot of the species we have right now.
For example, the end of the Neogene was when the first species of the Homo genus started appearing. This was also when the saber-toothed cats were around and ancient versions of what we call roly-poly.
That was the Neogene period. Thanks for watching.